My name is John Haber. I'm the Field Services Director for the California Preservation Foundation. For those of you who are new to the California Preservation Foundation, we're a 501c3 statewide nonprofit organization, and we're dedicated to protecting and celebrating the depth and diversity of California's historic places. And our programs are made possible through the generous support of our members, our donors, and our annual sponsors, including our lead education sponsor, WJE. If you'd like to become a part of this statewide preservation community, I wanted to invite you to join us and become a member at californiapreservation.org/join. I also wanted to remind everybody, since today is Giving Tuesday, that we want to acknowledge the generosity that allows us to offer programs like this at no cost, including the scores of you who choose to donate as part of your registration to this free program. So our educational events are made possible because of donors like you. And if you'd like to make a special Giving Tuesday gift, you can do so at californiapreservation.org/give. While you're supporting CPF, finally, I wanted to invite you to visit our annual preservation auction. Our auction is located at californiapreservation.org/bid. This year's auction features unique experiences and rare items, including a signed copy of Laura Ackley's book, San Francisco's Jewel City, a family membership to the Gardens of the Golden Gate Park, which is the site of the 1894 Midwinter Exposition, although we won't be talking about that today, and passes to the San Diego Museum of Art at Balboa Park. So to learn more about our auction, you can visit californiapreservation.org/bid. Today's program kicks off our new series, Where Worlds Meet. This explores global ideas, cultures, and architectural traditions that have shaped the built environment in California. And today's part one looks at the state expositions and World's Fair, World's Fairs in California, milestone events that introduced bold new architectural styles, showcased international collaboration, and left an enduring imprint on California's civic identity. I'm going to introduce our speakers right now in the order of presentation. First, we have Laura Ackley. Laura holds graduate degrees from the Harvard Graduate School of Design and the UC Berkeley College of Environmental Design. She's worked for a number of firms, including Lucasfilm, Bechtel Engineering, and Autodesk, and taught 3D computer modeling for more than a decade. And her award-winning book, San Francisco's Jewel City, the Panama-Pacific International Exposition of 1915, earned top honors from the California Book Awards, the National Independent Publisher Book Awards, and the San Francisco History Association. Laura is an approved architectural history consultant under the California Historical Resources Information System. Second, we have David Marshall. David Marshall is the president of Heritage Architecture and Planning, one of San Diego's leading preservation architecture firms, specializing in the restoration of historic structures. His portfolio includes major work on the Hotel del Coronado, the Western Metal Building at Petco Park, the Oregon Pavilion, and the historic Top Gun House. A former board member and president of the California Preservation Foundation, David has also authored 2 books featuring historic postcards, San Diego's Balboa Park and Forgotten San Diego. His work reflects a deep, long-standing commitment to the stewardship of California's architectural heritage. And last but not least, we have the wonderful Anne Schnabelen. I'm sorry, Anne. She shifted from doctoral research in medieval drama to focus on the largely overlooked Golden Gate International Exposition on Treasure Island, and she has since become a leading writer, lecturer, and advocate for the fair's surviving artworks and cultural legacy. As vice president of the Treasure Island Museum, she leads walking tours, manages the Little Island Big Ideas lecture series, and conducts ongoing research on the fair's Pacific Unity theme. Her work also examines the U.S. government's military investment in Treasure Island prior to the construction of the GGIE. So with that, I'm going to turn it briefly over to Laura Ackley, who will first talk about our 1915 Panama-Pacific Exposition. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, John. Let's see here. You will let me know if this comes up properly verbally. Is it there?
It's about to pop up. There it is.
Okay. All right. Looks like this may not go fast, so let's see. All right, here we go. Welcome to the fire hose. Thank you for your patience here. Good afternoon. I'm Laura Ackley. I am the author of San Francisco's Jewel City, the Panama-Pacific International Exposition of 1915. During this talk, I will also call the fair the PPIE, both for brevity and also sanity's sake. And I'd like to thank the California Preservation Foundation for hosting today. I'm going to fly through some of the design influences of the exhibit area of the fair, which I consider the most fully realized Beaux-Arts complex in history. Then I'm going to talk about 3 architects at the fair who used historical influences but broke all the rules to create its most beautiful and beloved spaces. So why do I believe that this is the most complete Beaux-Arts assemblage ever created? There have been many Beaux-Arts designed, the most famous of which is probably Baron Eugene Haussmann's interventions in Paris under Napoleon III, and the design for the layout of Washington, D.C. by Pierre L'Enfant. Their designs and those of other Beaux-Arts planners generally had to accommodate existing infill, while the PPIE was designed on a tabula rasa site. In addition, the World's Fair was created synthetically, with the planner and the architects all working toward a single vision. Lastly, the exposition only ran for 288 days, preventing the types of changes that are inevitable in a normal cityscape. So in a way, it was preserved in amber. So for the PPIE, the exposition company hired city planning expert Edward Bennett to prepare a block plan for the exposition. Bennett had been the late Daniel Burnham's former right-hand man, and the 2 men had produced an ambitious but unrealized Beaux-Arts report on a plan for San Francisco in late 1905, just before the great earthquake and fire decimated the city. The main plan of the PPIE was rigorously Beaux-Arts, but with a twist. The layout of the exhibit palaces, as they were called, differed significantly from previous American World's Fairs. While the buildings at Chicago, Buffalo, and St. Louis had striven for unified appearance, they still consisted of individual buildings set within a plan. Bennett conferred with the fair's architectural commission to produce the layout which featured the formal symmetry of circulation and building footprints of the Beaux-Arts, but allowed for design flexibility for the architects. All of these architects had Beaux-Arts pedigrees, having either attended the Paris École des Beaux-Arts itself or apprenticed under one of its major practitioners. Bay Area architect Vernon DeMars said of his predecessors, "All the architects talked the same language at that time. It was done in the Beaux-Arts, and they would never get a chance to build anything as big and stupendous as all this." In 1915, University of California professor Eugene Neuhaus wrote, "The Burnham plan for San Francisco was such an unrealized dream, but here the dream has achieved concrete form." So let's go on a tour of the fair. We're going to look at the exposition from west to east to get an idea of its size and layout. At the far western end, about 287 acres of the Presidio were used. To the east lay the Palace of Fine Arts, surrounded by the state and national pavilions. The 8 main palaces of the central block were similar in structure. In the south gardens, the Palace of Horticulture and Festival Hall were sited. Flanking the eastern end of the main block lay the gigantic Palace of Machinery, and then near its southern end, the Midway or Joy Zone extended 7 blocks east, terminating at Van Ness Avenue. The entire Jewel City, its nickname, was about 2.5 miles long and 1.5 miles deep. Since the 1830s, students at the École des Beaux-Arts were encouraged to study architectural classicism, but also newer historic and international modes and concepts, including Romanesque, Gothic, Renaissance and Islamic exemplars. Historian Richard Longstreth calls this academic eclecticism. He asserts, learning the principles required study of numerous examples from all major historical periods. Obtaining a comprehensive view of the past supposedly could increase the architect's faculty for critical analysis. Much of the PPIE embodied Greco-Roman neoclassicism, but it also exhibited an unusually prevalent dose of Byzantine and Islamic Iberian influences. At San Francisco, a system of palaces and courts was devised, in which the central 8 palaces, seen here with the smaller green domes, were similar in plan, differing mainly in facade detail, and were separated by grand courts, each designed by a different noted architect. 4 palaces mirrored each other on the east and west side of the Court of the Universe. Their distinguishing exterior features were their domes, elaborate entrances, and 5 towers on the north wall. The courts were outdoor rooms within the fortress-like perimeter walls, and each was lined with colonnades or arcades. Not only did the internally focused plan suit the programmatic and climatic requirements of the PPIE, it was appropriate geographically, as San Francisco lies at the same latitude as southern Spain. The entire exposition was planned as an harmonious whole, as opposed to the mostly white preceding World's Fairs. The PPIE's director of color, well-known illustrator Jules Guérin, envisioned a city of ivory and, quote, warm hues, not garish as dead white would be in the strong California sunshine, unquote. In addition to ivory, his color scheme included gray, golden orange, oxidized copper green, cerulean blue, and 3 tones of Pompeian red. John McLaren, superintendent of Golden Gate Park, was enlisted as chief of landscape architecture. He worked closely with the architects to achieve stunning landscape effects. The flowers in the parterres were changed 3 times over the course of the exposition, so they were always in bloom, and they were coordinated with Guérin's color scheme. At the PPIE, all of the architects were able to reference eras of historic architecture adroitly. The 8 main palaces were all designed by William Faville. He and his partner Walter Bliss had previously worked for McKim, Mead & White, designers of the huge neoclassical Court of the Universe. Charles McKim had himself attended the École des Beaux-Arts. Faville brought to mind the splendors of Turkish Byzantium in the palaces, each of which featured a cross-in-square plan topped by a dome. You can see the configuration in the raised red gable roofs with the green domes. In the PPIE's palaces, each dome at the intersection of the cross aisles floated above a lambent halo cast by a ring of small arched windows around the drum below, evoking the basilicas of the vanished Byzantine Empire. Here we see the resemblance between the exhibit palaces and Istanbul's most revered monument, the Hagia Sophia. Several small pavilions located on the south wall of the palace block were expressly Moorish, with stylized columns, slender pillars, and multifoil cusped horseshoe arches, like those of the Alhambra in Granada, Spain. The largest exemplars of Moorish style at the PPIE were the misnamed Italian towers. Chief of Architecture George Kellam guarded the opening of each of 2 courts with a pair of these towers. Each pair differed slightly from the other, but all 4 were based loosely on the Giralda Tower in Seville, Spain, which was a former Islamic minaret constructed in the late 12th century. Also highlighting similarities between Northern California's Mediterranean climate, many of the exposition's designers use Spanish Renaissance motifs. For the main entrance of the Palace of Varied Industries, Faville had sculptor Gustav Gerlach reinterpret the 16th century door of the Hospital de Santa Cruz in Toledo. Faville also invoked Spanish styles in the 4 plateresque portals on the north wall facing the bay. Plateresque is the flamboyant style named for its resemblance to fancy Spanish silverwork. So now we get to the east side, which is Renaissance. The Avenue of Progress featured these sober gateways and pilasters topped with California bears. Much of the rest of the PPIE was more in a neoclassical mode. The west side, which faced the Palace of Fine Arts, featured 2 112-foot tall half domes. The Great Central Court of the Universe was by McKim, Mead, and White, and it was inspired by Bernini's massive oval piazza at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Henry Bacon, whose Lincoln Memorial was being constructed at the same time as the PPIE, designed the Court of the Four Seasons. The court was actually 340 feet square, but the architect chamfered the corners using 45-degree colonnades, creating screens. Each one was backed by a lit fountain depicting a season of the year. The vast 9-acre capacity Palace of Machinery by San Franciscan Clarence Ward loomed east of these Faville palaces. Its configuration was loosely based on ancient Roman baths or thermae, particularly the Great Baths of Caracalla. The exclamation point at the center of the exposition was the Tower of Jewels, designed by Thomas Hastings of Carrara and Hastings. The confection of a building stepped back in 7 tiers. Its arched base was 120 feet square in plan and 152 feet high over a classical triumphal arch. That is, the base was 152 feet high. The entire tower was 435 feet high, so that's 43 stories. You could imagine this building now in the middle of the marina, 43-story building in the marina. Now let's look at the 3 architects I mentioned who used their knowledge of the classical styles to develop really innovative and entrancing spaces for the PPIE. Louis Christian Mulgart created an ebullient court that was the most fanciful structure at the fair, the Court of Ages. At night, it seemed like an outdoor cathedral of a mysterious religion, with incense urns burning all around with colorful, flickering flames. On the perimeter of the central lagoon, quartets of coiled snakes spat tongues of live flame into steaming braziers. The embellishments along the arcades appeared at a distance to be lacy Gothic motifs, but up close the decorations were revealed as delicately modeled ascending water bubbles, kelp, crustaceans, fish, turtles, and animals, which Mulgart said symbolized evolution from plants and sea life to terrestrial creatures. The architecture of the court was variously described, because nobody could figure it out, as Spanish, Romanesque, Moorish, Oriental, and French in influence. But Gothic was clearly at its heart, and I like to term it seafood Gothic. The cornice was topped by fanciful protrusions of ornaments, which were descendants of medieval crockets. The PPIE's official historian, Frank Morton Todd, called the court extravagant and festive, as exposition architecture ought to be. The gorgeous Palace of Horticulture in the South Gardens was designed by local architect Arthur Brown Jr. of Bakewell and Brown. Its layout was based upon the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. That's loosely. But Brown's version was effervescent, featuring caryatids supporting the colonnades, plaster floral festoons, and an iridescent glass dome that at 180 feet in diameter was the largest in the world in 1915, including being larger than the dome of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Some likened it to a giant opal, but I call it an Ottoman mosque cast in iridescent turquoise glass, then dipped into a fondue of French ornament. What I find remarkable is at the same time that uh, this extravagant, gorgeous dome and palace was being built, was actually finished in the Expositions North Gardens, an entirely different monumental dome by the same architect, Arthur Brown Jr., was under construction about a mile away up Van Ness Avenue, San Francisco City Hall. And so rather than this playful, ephemeral riff on an exquisite mosque, the dome of the new City Hall was based on another architectural history precedent, the entirely more sober dome of the Val de Grace Church in Paris. So here you can see Arthur Brown Jr. absolutely playing with completely different architectural history precedents. Now, the sole PPIE building remaining on site, our beloved Palace of Fine Arts, is the most familiar to most of us, but it still has some interesting secrets to tell. In August 1912, the Architectural Commission reviewed the early plans for all the palaces. They were especially impressed with this lovely charcoal sketch of the Palace of Fine Arts, and they congratulated architect Willis Polk, who had been assigned the design. Polk. Polk, however, said the drawings were by Bernard Maybeck and that Maybeck ought to be engaged to finish the design, with which the commission wholeheartedly agreed. Many thought that the palace was a perfect copy of an ancient temple, perhaps something Maybeck had seen in his travels, or in the Giovanni Battista Piranesi etchings of Roman ruins that he said inspired him. Except no such temple ever existed until Maybeck brought it forth from his imagination. Construction magazine pointed out that the palace did not conform to any of the canons of Greek or Roman archetypes, yet was tremendously successful. Quote, "Everybody admits that it is most beautiful, and very seem to know just how this was accomplished," unquote. The palace's colonnades required columns of two different heights, and here Maybeck defied both Greek and Renaissance conventions. He noted that in the Renaissance period, the taller columns would have been Corinthian and the shorter Ionic, and that in ancient Greece, the two orders never would have been mixed. Maybeck created his own visually satisfying pattern. He demonstrated mastery of the classical canons. He wrote, all of the columns were of the Corinthian order, but he made the taller columns proportionately slenderer than the shorter columns. The shorter columns also received shorter, wider capitals to reinforce the feeling of a heavy Doric. The palace's colonnades required, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself here. In ancient Greece, the two orders never would have been mixed. So he said that the shorter columns also received those wider capitals to reinforce the feeling of Doric. The willowy female figures by sculptor Ulrich Ellerhusen leaned over the corners, appearing to weep into the boxes atop the colonnades. Maybeck also noted that during the Renaissance, boxes atop colonnades would have had shields or ornaments on their corners, but the classical Grecian version would have had human figures. So our Palace of Fine Arts has neither exactly. He wrote, The difference between the Greek method of composing and mine is that the figure turned its back to the audience. This was done for sentimental reasons and to strike a minor key of sadness, unquote. And here's what they turned out to look like. So now the legacy of the fair. So the legacy of the fair is mostly intangible. The exposition fulfilled its true purpose admirably, and that was to replace in the mind of the world the image of San Francisco as a post-earthquake and fire ruin with that of a vibrant, majestic, and even magical city. In addition, the fair brought in almost 19 million visitors, many of them from outside California or beyond US borders. As one of the few profitable United States World's Fairs, the PPIE pumped about $45 million into California's economy from outside the state. That's about $10 billion today. However, because of its foreordained demolition, there's little left of the fair in the built environment. There are 3 locations we can still visit. The Palace of Fine Arts is the only structure from the exposition on the exposition grounds that we can still visit. The second is the Exposition Auditorium, now called the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium. It was finished before the PPIE began and hosted many of the more than 900 conferences held in conjunction with the fair and became part of the permanent planned Civic Center. The fair and Civic Center's Beaux-Arts style, however, was on its way out. By the end of World War I, architectural fashion was already changing, and one could scarcely find a pedimented neoclassical building constructed after 1925. The Great Depression also halted a great deal of planned construction. Finally, there is the Marina Green. The greensward was built as part of the fair itself to host pageants, athletic demonstrations, flights, and other special events. Although it, like almost all of the PPIE, was built on leased land, about 60% of the exposition's stock was used to purchase the Marina Green as a permanent city amenity, which remains to this day. One can still find physical vestiges of the exposition spread far and wide, because as the buildings came down, the site turned into a veritable architectural yard sale, where anyone could buy a bench, an urn, a window, a tree, or even an entire building. Sculptures and art were snapped up by institutions and moved across the state and nation. Many of these are detailed in a wonderful downloadable brochure by my friends Glenn Koch and Zoe Heimdahl called After the Lights Went Out. So, although the academic eclecticism and rigorous planning of the PPIE did not leave a strong mark on San Francisco's built environment once the fair was done, it left a legacy nonetheless. With the Court of Ages, the Palace of Horticulture, and the Palace of Fine Arts, Mulgart, Brown, and Maybeck used their foundational knowledge of tradition while enlivening architectural rhythms, proportions, and textures. They generated unique and sublime spaces. These architects believed a grounding in historic architecture made stronger 20th century design. And that's it for today. Thank you to the California Preservation Foundation for inviting me, and I hope you've all enjoyed the PPIE.
Thank you very much, Laura. You might notice some questions in the Q&A box, and if you'd like and you're willing to, feel free to type in answers to those. Otherwise, we'll see if we can cover them in the Q&A. Next, we have David Marshall, who will be talking about the 1915 California Pacific Exposition, as well as the 1935 and 36 Exposition in San Diego at Balboa Park. Feel free to take it away, David.
Thank you, John. I am based in San Diego with Heritage Architecture and Planning, and so I'm going to be covering the 2 expos that were in San Diego and Balboa Park. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Balboa Park and may not realize there were 2 expos there. The same year as the Panama-Pacific International Expo was San Diego's competing or complementary Panama-California Exposition. And this is the official seal. Over here. Advancing my slides. There we go. There were several themes related to this expo. It was to commemorate, of course, the opening of the Panama Canal the year prior. It was to highlight San Diego as the nearest port, Pacific port, to the canal, promoting San Diego Bay as the harbor of the sun, celebrating San Diego's Spanish-Mexican heritage, show off San Diego's ideal climate, and promote San Diego as a business, agricultural, and tourist destination. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the competition between San Diego and San Francisco, which Laura and I could fight it out later during Q&A maybe. But this was a very interesting process because both San Diego and San Francisco wanted to do an expo to celebrate the Panama Canal opening. Interestingly, or maybe the deciding factor in which became the official exposition is the populations of both cities in 1910. San Diego was only 40,000 people, whereas San Francisco was 10 times that. But if we look at it today, it's an interesting comparison where San Diego is 1.4 million and San Francisco is 809,000. So San Diego's population has increased 35 times since then, and San Francisco's is about doubled. But San Francisco was awarded the official exposition. Congress voted in 1911 to award the official expo to San Francisco, which was not looked at too keenly in San Diego. This is a quote from San Diego's Director General referring to San Francisco's latest action, which is basically going for the expo as the official one was, let me see, all of our past acts, the right to the proud title of Judas. It was San Diego which first started the exposition idea. It was San Diego who first advertised California as the exposition state. It was San Diego who gave precedence to San Francisco. And for this, we get a knife in the back. Now, that may not all be true. That may be his version of the story, but there was not a very good relationship when it started. But things did improve as things went on. These are postcards. Many of the images I'm showing are postcards. But these are competing postcards. San Diego on the left, San Francisco's on the right. Notice that on the left, all of the ships passing through the Panama Canal are ending up in San Diego. And San Francisco up here, not a single lonely ship. But here's San Francisco's expo postcard, calling the Kiss of the Oceans. And they're not showing the ships traveling through, but definitely San Francisco's in larger print than San Diego, which you could barely read here. This is one of San Diego's promotional cards, again, showing the ships passing through the canal and heading into San Diego. And if you notice, San Francisco is not even on the map here. There's no Los Angeles, there's no San Francisco, it's just all San Diego. Now, when the expos actually went underway, they were promoted by the railroad companies as basically, come to both. And this is a postcard that's typical, showing what they refer to as California's expositions, 1915, and the dates they were running. San Diego's actually began in January, whereas San Francisco's didn't begin until February 20th. But it is true that many people did go to both expos. Now, where was Los Angeles in this whole exercise? Well, they were feeling a little left out, so they put out this postcard where it's showing the San Francisco Expo and the San Diego Expo as the bread in the sandwich, and Los Angeles is the meat. And they have their little poem here. I guess they were feeling a little bit left out, so they had to show that they were the real important thing in California. Later on, I found an interesting postcard. This came out of San Diego, a real estate company, actually. And this is San Francisco and San Diego making fun of Los Angeles. Sandy, the conversation between Sandy and Frisky. And the joke here is that San Francisco's uh, bay is not even large enough for a shark to survive. And so I think both San Francisco and San Diego, especially baseball fans, enjoy to this day attacking Los Angeles as much as possible. Now, there's an important connection between both San Diego and San Francisco, and that's John D. Spreckels, who was a millionaire sugar magnate and developer. He moved from San Francisco to San Diego in 1906, which is not coincidentally the year of the big earthquake. And he became one of San Diego's most important civic leaders and was instrumental in bringing the expo to San Diego in 1915. He also paid for the Spreckels Organ Pavilion, which you can see here in these postcard images, which is still there today. Now, does size matter? Well, it does. This really shows the scale difference between what you heard from Laura, what was happening in San Francisco versus San Diego, and the largest buildings at both expositions. Whereas we have the 435-foot tall Tower of Jewels, San Diego's largest building for the expo was only 208 feet tall, and that was the California Tower at the Museum of Us. And that is still standing, but as you can see, it is dwarfed by comparison. Now, San Diego's the theme of the expo is really to create this fantasy world, which is true for many expositions. This is a quote from George Marston, who was one of the civic leaders at the time, referring to you finding yourself in another world as you cross the entrance, the Cabrillo Bridge, into the park grounds. The theme for the expo architecturally was Spanish Colonial Revival. It was fairly consistently used, whereas you heard from Laura that there was a mix of styles under the Beaux-Arts umbrella in San Francisco. San Diego had to really emphasize the Spanish theme. This is another building that's still standing. This has been reconstructed. I worked on this as an architect in 1997. It's now known as the House of Hospitality, but you can see the use of ornamentation and landscaping to really create these beautiful palaces. Also, there were large grounds that included orchards and this model farm you can see in the foreground, showing how everything grows in San Diego and California to a larger extent. We had our own fun zone. This was known as the Isthmus, after the Isthmus of Panama. And of course, there were rides and various attractions. One of the more interesting attractions is actually a celebration of the Panama Canal. This was called the Panama Canal Extravaganza. You can see the painted backdrop, like a Hollywood backdrop here. And they had the various locks and lighthouses and rail cars that were part of the exhibit. There was some international participation in San Diego's expo, even though it wasn't the official expo. This is the Japanese Tea Pavilion and Gardens. This building was actually designed and manufactured in Japan and was disassembled and shipped over and then reassembled. It actually survived up until the 1950s when it was replaced by the Children's Zoo in Balboa Park. This is another interesting exhibit. This one was unique to San Diego's expo, called the Painted Desert. It was several Indian tribes were brought into San Diego to show various lifestyles and also the arts and rugs and jewelry that they created. There was even a cliff dwelling creation done out of basically plaster and paper mache that was to show. This was all promoted by the Santa Fe Railroad Company for people to visit Arizona and New Mexico, which had only become official states 3 years prior to the expo. The Exposition San Diego, even though it was smaller than San Francisco, was very successful, and they extended it a full second year. So it went on for 2 years rather than just 10 months. And this is a poster from that period, and notice at the bottom the word international was added, which they were not allowed to use when San Francisco's expo was going on. But they did bring some of the exhibits from San Francisco down to San Diego for the second year. Now we compare the numbers, the expo size. They were similar in their footprints as far as the acreage they covered. Duration, you can see the difference, 24 months to 9. Attendance was quite significantly higher for San Francisco, 18.8 million versus less than 4 million for San Diego. And the profit was also significantly different. Although they were both profitable, San Francisco's had a bigger number there. This was a writer after the expositions continued talking about, or after they completed, this is comparing the two expositions. Talks about the vast and ponderous San Francisco exposition was an overpowering, muscular Greek athlete, while the small scale and friendly San Diego exposition was a young and attractive maiden. So that's one way of thinking about how they compared. Now, of course, the architect for our exposition was Bertram Goodhue out of New York, and he was the lead architect. This is actually a drawing that he did in 1911, showing an early concept of what he wanted to achieve with the Spanish Colonial Revival style. And this is how he described his vision as creating a city in miniature, wherein everything that meets the eye and ear of the visitor recalled the glamour and mystery and poetry of the old Spanish days, and that a new city of old Spain not only would be in closer harmony with the beauties of Southern California, but it would also be a distinct step forward in American architecture. Now, talking about lasting legacy, which I know that Laura touched on, in San Diego, the legacy was much more architectural because the Spanish Colonial Revival style had not really been that known. We had a mission style that had been used prior to 1915, but Spanish Colonial was very rare. And this really put it on the forefront. And of course, what we refer to as a red tile style. Of course, the whole city of Santa Barbara is based on Spanish Colonial Revival. And so, it's well known that San Diego's Expo is credited with giving Spanish Colonial Revival its national exposure and influence, especially in California. Also, talking about what the lasting legacy is, San Diego was lucky in that we did not have the land demand requirements that San Francisco had with being a larger city, where they basically had to scrape the temporary buildings and start replacing them with permanent buildings. So whereas San Francisco, the Palace of Fine Arts, which is a reconstruction of the original building, is the only large remaining building on the original grounds. Whereas San Diego is, luckily, we have the National Historic Landmark District in Balboa Park, where we have 13 buildings that are either original that have survived from 1915, or they are reconstructions of those buildings. So we really have a district that is rare on exposition sites. And I will have to say, I'm biased, but I would say that from the legacies that stand today for the people to experience, that San Diego, with its remaining exposition buildings and its influence, the work by Bertram Goodhue, that even though it was a smaller expo and was less profitable and less attended, the introduction of Spanish Colonial Revival as the adopted California style, I think has been a very strong legacy. And that's something that San Diego is very proud of. Now I want to touch on, say my remaining minutes here, our second expo in Balboa Park, which was 20 years later, which was also extended a second year. You can see the seal here. We stole the name of San Francisco's exposition. We replaced one word. We replaced Panama with California, and this became the California-Pacific International Exposition of 1935. To confuse people even further these days about all the names of the expos. The themes of that expo were to create an everlasting symbol of the new era of greatness in the West, to promote San Diego as the birthplace of California. Of course, the first mission was built in San Diego of the California missions. Celebrate San Diego's recovery from the Great Depression, leading to tomorrow's greater prosperity. And also, more pragmatically, to repurpose exhibits from Chicago's 33-34 Century of Progress exposition, which came in quite handy because many of the rides and some of the other attractions just headed west and appeared in San Diego. This is the cover of the guidebook from the second year when it was extended for 2 full years. But you could really see the theme of the Spanish Revival was still very much in vogue. There's a poster here on the left showing the promotion of the ticket sales. There's actually a U.S. postage stamp, 3-cent postage stamp that was done for the exposition, which you can see, and also a $50 that was minted, and you can still find from coin collectors that was done with the California building on one side, celebrating the exposition in 35. Now, this is the main El Prado area, Plaza de Panama, that was repurposed. Since many of the buildings had survived, they were reused for the second expo. This building in the middle was added. It's called the Arch of the Future, and those reflecting pools were added as well. But the buildings on the perimeter, including the organ pavilion in the distance, were from 1915. An entire section of the expo grounds was added in 35 called the Palisades. This was one of the buildings that was added at that time that was borrowing from kind of the Mayan style architecture of South America and Central America. This is the California State Building with a fountain in the foreground. And those murals you see above the entry doors had actually disappeared over the years. But thankfully, they were restored in 2021 by the Committee of 100. This is a photo by Save Our Heritage organization showing those murals were restored, and that ornamentation was also missing, and that was recreated from photographs as well. And here's a close-up of those tiles. There were several hundred of these tiles that are 12 inches square, which are the size of record albums, for those of you who remember LPs. And those are all custom hand-painted and glazed to create those missing murals from 35. Notice the car has a 35 vintage as well. This is another one of the Palisades buildings. This is the Palace of Electricity and Varied Industries, which was added in 35. And it had a robot that was one of the featured attractions. Alpha the robot, you can see he's holding a handgun there. I'm not sure. Hopefully it wasn't loaded. But he was one of the attractions. And then the picture on the right shows a man in a suit imitating Alpha the robot, promoting people to go visit that building and see the real Alpha the robot. And I'll conclude with a slide that's kind of, well, we got a few more slides here. This is the fun zone from 35. Ripley's had their, believe it or not, auditorium, spelled ODD. That is kind of a unique style. I'm not sure what architectural style that is, but this was out in the Midway area of 35. A new building, which was sponsored by the Ford Motor Corporation. They had the Ford building promoting their newest automobiles and also letting people go for a test drive on a road that was right behind the building, which is now where the 163 freeway is. This is now the Air and Space Museum. We also had some more interesting attractions. This one was the Zorro Gardens Nudist Colony. And yes, it was. The women wore G-strings and the men wore loincloths, but they did not wear anything for their upper bodies and were partially nude. And people could buy tickets to observe the naturalists in their own environment and watch their little ceremonies to the sun god. Of course, this was the most popular attraction in 1935, most profitable. And the garden still exists, but it's now a butterfly garden. And kind of tie it all together, we get Alpha the robot posing for this photograph with one of the Queen Zorine of the nudist colony to help promote the fair in San Diego. So I will say that the 35 fair, even though it was not as well known, or not as well known as the 1915 fair in San Diego, it actually had 6.7 million visitors, which was almost double what the fair had in 1915. Of course, San Diego's population was larger at that time as well. But they were both successful, and they both really led to our current legacy of architecture in Balboa Park. So with that, I will pass it on to Anne. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Laura is doing a heroic job of answering questions, so thank you so much. That'll give us some more time to really hear from the wonderful Anne about the 1939 and 40 GGIE. And we may run a few minutes late. We will be recording this if you have to leave, but I want to give Anne her full allotted time of 15 minutes. So we look forward to hearing from you, Anne. You're muted, Anne. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Please tell me what I need to do here.
Oh, okay.
Wait a minute.
Go ahead and select the. There you are.
Okay, there I am. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. David, there are really a lot of parallels between San Diego 35 and San Francisco 39. Didn't you also have Sally Rand?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, I'm not going to talk about Sally Rand, but anyway, the World's Fairs we've been considering left beautiful and accessible space behind. In San Diego, there is the truly fabulous Balboa Park, and the PPIE, of course, left the incomparable Palace of Fine Arts and some squishy landfill for the Marina District. What did the Golden Gate International Exposition leave behind on Treasure Island? Prior to and during the fair, public announcements boasted that San Francisco would have a new airport after the exposition closed. Instead of an airport, San Francisco had a naval base, which stayed put until 1997. Then the transfer of the island to the city of San Francisco began. The loss of the beautiful and popular fair in 1941 was a disappointment, as was the failure of the building of an airport. But there were early signs that the Navy had its eye on Treasure Island, and that transfer from the fair to the Navy brought out a lot of interesting things, including this cartoon, which I'm not going to read, but maybe you will. And it points out a difficulty people had if they tried to go to use their fare tickets to get onto the naval base. A potential war with Japan loomed over the creation of the island and had a powerful influence. The airport plans gave the federal government a compelling interest in the island, and so the Public Works Administration funded most of its creation, and the Army Corps of Engineers built an island in 1936 and 37. The Pan American Airways China Clipper flying boats traveled from Treasure Island to Hong Kong from 1938 and during the war. Like the island itself and the government exhibits at the fair, the Clippers were heavily subsidized. Arrivals and departures were a popular form of entertainment for fairgoers. But the Clippers had other purposes. The American Clippers and the Japanese military spied on each other out over the Pacific, especially around the Clipper refueling sites on Pacific Islands, which you can see on this map, Midway and Wake, for example, which are much better known now as World War II battle sites than fueling depots for the Pan Am Clippers. San Francisco newspapers posted stories documenting that the Navy might want the island after the fair. In 1934, in a discussion about the as yet unbuilt island with President Roosevelt, Secretary of the Navy Admiral Claude Swanson requested that the island include a submarine turning basin. An article in the San Francisco News in 1939 states, if the Navy wants Treasure Island after the fair, chances are the Navy will get it. And this was before the fair even opened. The fair's title was chosen in 1936, Golden Gate International Exposition, a pageant of the Pacific. The theme was articulated in a speech by President Roosevelt in 1937. Unity of the Pacific nations is America's concern and responsibility. And so, to the Golden Gate International Exposition, I gladly entrust a solemn duty. The exposition endeavored to fulfill that duty. The fair was first proposed in an editorial in 1933. The writer suggested opening a few years ahead, excuse me, when the Depression would surely be over, there would be new bridges to celebrate, but also everybody missed the PPIE and wanted another World's Fair. In 1936, a perimeter of boulders was built north of Yerba Buena Island. Tons of mud was dredged from the bottom of the bay and dumped on the underlying shoals. Once it was landscaped and an exquisite island paradise materialized, the island earned the sobriquet, the Magic City. The fair was open for 15 months over 1939 and 40. The GGIE opened on the third Saturday in February, as the PPIE had done. It was San Francisco's practice to open fairs in the wintertime to show off our weather and attract real estate buyers. The concurrent New York Fair didn't open until April. The first buildings constructed were designed by architects Will Day and George Kellum of the PPIE and intended for the proposed airport. They were made of permanent materials and they are still standing. In 2008, these buildings were listed on the National Register. Treasure Island itself became California State Landmark number 987 in 1989. The semicircular building has been the administrative base for the Expo, the Navy, and since about 1997, the Treasure Island Development Authority, also known as TIDA, which manages the island on behalf of the city. The administration building is also the location of the Treasure Island Museum and still has many of its original features, including a terrazzo floors. Please come visit. A few memorable buildings from the fair were the most admired building then and now was the Yerba Buena Clubhouse, designed by William Worcester, favored by architectural critics and historians for its international style. Ernest Weehee's Portals of the Pacific were also highly admired, and they functioned as wind baffles around the main entrances. The stretch Gothic Tower of the Sun was designed by Arthur Brown, another PPIE architect. It was allegedly 400 feet tall. Half of its octagonal footprint is still present on the island thanks to the Loma Prieta earthquake. The island sunk around the foundation. You can see it. It's this little octagon there. And here it is, featured in one of the Disney Company's Travel Tykes newsletters. The tower's carillon has started to ring, causing the building to shake and knocking Donald Duck off the tower. The carillon is now at Grace Cathedral, and here is a picture of the largest bell called the Borden, and that's me about 30 years ago. The fair followed an official palette of colors with titles suggesting, guess what, Pacific themes: Imperial Dragon Red, Polynesian Brown, Pagoda Yellow, Hawaiian Emerald, and Ming Jade Green, among others. The official guidebook states that a special style of architecture was chosen to represent the fair's theme. And this is a quote: "The new mode, Pacifica," named after the fair's theme goddess, "was created to embody building motifs from the eastern and western shores of the Pacific." Another treatise stated that contemporary architects provided updated styling to ancient or primitive Asian and South American building motifs to inspire a vision of the ruins of mysterious Angkor crumbling under the weight of jungle vegetation. And I'm not making that up. Buildings along the southern and western perimeters of the island follow these principles. So those are the area along here. Oops, here and here. The idea was to create the vision of an ancient walled city. As David mentioned, World's Fairs tried to create a fantasy world, and this was the fantasy of the GGIE. I don't know, GGIE is Golden Gate International Exposition. The most fabulous examples of the Pacifica style are architect Donald Mackey's almost literal ruins of mysterious Angkor, the elephant towers, and in this photo, they're flanking what the Tower of the Sun and the Portals of the Pacific. Donald told us that indeed he modeled them on the Elephant Terrace at Angkor Wat with a Cubist infusion. An almost equal prize goes to William Merchant and Bernard Maybeck's, that's another PPIE holdover, for the Temples of the East, featuring lotus-shaped entryways and gilded finials. The Court of Pacifica was one of two areas devoted to Pacific unity. Ralph Stackpole, one of the most prominent local artists to provide originally art for the GGIE, was the creator of the Valkyrian Pacifica. Here are a few words about her from the wild romantic imagination of Juliet James, who wrote treatises on the art and architecture of both the PPIE and the GGIE. Do those bent hands not entreat? She's begging for peace. The lead architect of the Court of Pacifica was Timothy Pfluger. He selected 8 local artists for the sculptures which represent peoples of the Pacific around the Fountain of Western Waters from North and South America, China, and Pacific Islands. These cast stone sculptures have a chunky, sometimes awkward beauty, not unlike federal style sculpture. Most of these sculptures survive. The Pacific area was a collection of buildings representing the countries of the Pacific. Oh, there are more statues. Sorry about that. So I just want to show you where we're talking about. The Court of Pacifica was here on the western side of the island, and the Pacific area is over here. They're two separate areas. Those are the two areas where that embodied the Pacific theme of the fair. The Pacific area was a collection of buildings representing the countries of the fair's Pacific participants. At the center was Pacific House by another William Merchant design, a huge window on the 4 identical external walls featured long vanes which provided cooled the main space inside. Daily educational and cultural programming was managed by the Institute of Pacific Relations, an international think tank established to promote cooperation among Pacific countries. Inside the building were 2 of the most impressive works of art created for the fair: the Terracotta Fountain of the Pacific by Antonio Sotomayor, fabricated at Gladdy McBean, and the 6 Pageant of the Pacific murals by Miguel Covarrubias. These majestic works still survive. Art exhibited at the fair also reflected the Pacific theme. Harvard archaeologist Langdon Warner, one of the models for Indiana Jones, was the curator of the substantial Pacific Cultures exhibit in 1939. And the Rivera mural Pan American Unity was created in the Art Palace in 1940, the centerpiece of the Art in Action studio exhibition. It recently enjoyed a lengthy exhibit in SF MoMA. And a couple of fun and happy preservation stories. William Merchant recreated a version of his Pacific House when he designed the Sailors Union of the Pacific, completed in 1950. The building's facade imitates the design of an exterior wall of Pacific House. So that's Pacific House on top and the Sailors Union on the bottom. John Schinnerer visited Treasure Island in 1940 at age 11. He was enchanted by William Merchant's South Towers. In 1980, he had the exterior of his Long Beach bar, the Silver Fox, remodeled by noted theatrical designer Joseph Musel. So that's South Towers on top, Silver Fox on the bottom. Serious preservation issues facing the island. The 3 original buildings need work. Those are the airport buildings, and those I'm sure TIDA will get done eventually. In 1942, the Navy demolished the Court of Pacifica, or most of it, and there's poor Pacifica coming down very ungracefully. They left the statues, the statues from the court, if you recall those, pretty much in place. And I'm just going to scroll through a few photos of that court over the last 80 years. They relocated the terracotta map from Pacific House in that court, and you can see it in the background there. In the late 80s, a sculpture garden was designed for all of these pieces, the fountain and the 16 surviving sculptures, to be located at the front of the administration building. Unfortunately, the Navy changed its mind about that. and put most of the sculptures and the fountain into storage after dividing the sculpture into its component pieces. 6 sculptures were restored and installed for public viewing in front of the administration building, but everything else was put into storage. There they are in front of some of them in front of the building. Over the nearly 30 years of Tida's control of the island, they've moved all of these pieces, 300 pieces of the fountain and 16 heavy sculptures, that's multiple tons of cast stone and fragile terracotta, from one storage facility to another and kept them behind locked doors. I'm grateful Tida has always responded kindly to my request to bring visitors, often historians, to see them. That's Carl Nolte. 2 years ago, most of these pieces were moved for the first time into a clean and well-lit storage space with public access. And I had the privilege of bringing many people on walking tours. If we announced a walking tour, it filled up very quickly. But as of September, all of the sculptures and the fountain have been put into storage, and Tida tells me that they are completely inaccessible. A last few pictures of them in the clean and well-lit space. And now they are not in that anymore. So completely inaccessible now, and also no sculptures on display in front of the building. The Treasure Island Treasure Island Arts Master Plan explicitly provides for the conservation and display of the sculptures with this caveat, if feasible. I don't know who will determine feasibility or by what criteria. The plan is funded by 1% of the construction costs of the Treasure Island redevelopment, estimated to be around $5 billion over the next 10 years or so. It'll probably be $15 billion by the time they're done. So far, the plan has spent $1 million for the creation and installation of a stainless steel sculpture by Japanese artist and architect Hiroshi Sugimoto on Yerba Buena Island called The Point of Infinity. They spent a bit more on smaller pieces. The statues and fountain together represent the soul of the exposition. Along with the surviving airport buildings, the statues and fountain have a status similar to the PPIE's Palace of Fine Arts. According to the redevelopment website, 300 acres of open space will be available when the project is complete. Perhaps in some of those 300 open acres, there will be space for a group of statues, perhaps a fountain so deeply infused with the story and culture of the island. Surely it will be feasible to use some of the money generated by 1% of $5 billion to restore the art of the exposition. Thank you very much. And thank you, John, and the California Preservation Foundation for putting this program on.
Thank you very much, Anne. It's a
Okay.
sad ending to a wonderful collection of
Mhm.
stories, but I think there's a positive outlook that you've pointed to is potential solutions to saving these priceless pieces of art
Mhm.
from the exposition. So thank you for your advocacy and everything you've done.
Thank
Uh,
you.
I wanted to cover very quickly some questions that may not have been covered in relation to Anne's presentation. I'm going to be closing this up afterwards, but I do promise to send our attendees a summary of the questions that were answered by our other panelists so that they know the answers to those questions. But Anne, going to your presentation, Paul is asking who restored the 6 statues in front of Building 1 and who paid for that restoration.
It was paid for partly by the Navy and partly by a private party, a family member of one of the sculptors. And I know the name of the person and I can send it to you. I've been in touch with her over the years. And I'll it's call the something. Yeah, I can't think of the name. I'll send it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
There's also another question about the sculptor Ettore Catoren. He
Mhm.
created the Evening Star for GGIE. Do you know if it
Correct.
brought
Correct. Yeah. He did 2 sculptures. He did the moon and stars and the evening star.
and both of those have survived?
I oh no, not
No.
as far as I know. Although I did see a model in one of his assistants I interviewed, and she had a model of the moon and stars. And all this, it's so hard to do 15 minutes, John. It's just really hard.
I know. We need to bring each of you back for a full hour. You know, part of this is my fault. I like to go quickly through a palimpsest of various stories in California for this holiday series and try to get as many people together as possible. So this is
Right.
just a taste of what we could potentially talk about later. Um, I wanted to thank all three of our speakers. And before we close out, I also wanted to give each of you an opportunity to say, some of you are involved in advocacy. David's an architect. Laura, you're an author and also an architectural historian. But what is your call to action for everybody? If you had to implore people to do something about these wonderful spaces, what would you ask them to do? And we'll go in order of presentations. Laura.
Oh, great. Now I'm on the spot. Um, Call to action. Well, for the PPIE, the Palace of Fine Arts always needs redoing, right? It always needs redoing. And so when we get calls out to raise funds for that, I would do that. The GGIE, I would say that there is the situation there with the sculptures and the fountain and the art. They're much more real, touchable, tangible things, and I would absolutely recommend contributing there to the Treasure Island Museum and also agitating for that. For the PPIE, I would also like to mention that the exposition organ, which was the biggest instrument in the world at the time, got after the Loma Prieta. It was damaged. It was in the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium. It got sent back to the makers. They got 95% of the way finished with fixing it. And then San Francisco ran out of money, and so they sent all the pieces back, and they're in the bottom of City Hall. It's really a shame. It was not meant for outdoor use, and so finding a place to put it is very, very difficult. But it would be wonderful to have that instrument back, and notably, San Diego has theirs in Balboa Park with the band shell, and it is absolutely magical. And while I don't think we can put ours outside because it wasn't designed for that, to have that amenity, that public amenity, is really spectacular. And there was a group called Friends of the Exposition Organ. So for the PPIE, you might want to look that up specifically. I can't speak to what San Diego and Balboa Park needs, but I know that it's been an absolutely heroic effort to restore those buildings, and they are amazing. I know when I went down there 10 years ago, I believe it was the horticultural palace was closed off, and I think now it's been restored to a degree. That is just amazing stuff. So if they need money, give it there. I mean, mainly it's money and tourism and talking about it to keep the memories alive.
Yeah, that's one aspect of the heritage of these fairs that our speakers didn't cover too much was the sounds and the music and things that are associated with the sounds of these fairs. You talked about light and architecture and all these other sort of aspects of the fairs, but I think that Oregon call to action is a great call to action. So, David, what are your thoughts on the exposition and grounds in San Diego?
Well, as with anything, money is always the primary need. The city of San Diego has not been putting the money they need to into preserving the buildings. There have been a lot of private organizations like Committee of 100 and Forever Balboa Park that have tried to sponsor these, including the Botanical Building, which Laura mentioned, which did reopen last year and is looking really terrific. I used to tell clients that once it's gone forever. But I'm happy to say, as an architect who specializes in restoration and reconstruction, it is possible to bring back missing elements And there is hope for Treasure Island and some of the other places that have lost things, because there are some elements in San Diego's expo grounds in Balboa Park that were gone that are being reconstructed. Pergolas, arcades, and some entire buildings that were temporary and made permanent. So there's always hope, not only to preserve what we have, but to recreate missing elements that were important. And yeah, I'd say support your local preservation organization as much as you can, because they'll know what's needed and where the fights are.
Thank you. And closing out with Anne.
We're easy. We're easy. Join the Treasure Island Museum. I think we are the primary purveyors of information about the statues in the fountain remaining from the fair. So join the museum or just get on our mailing list. But we are small but mighty, and we are very poor. And of course, we are trying to raise money like everybody else. Laura, I love the fact that that the organ still exists, that there have been efforts to restore it. I wonder if people at Taito will scoff at this, but how about putting it in one of the hangar buildings on Treasure Island? There would even be room for the pipes. Anyway, and I think the Organ Pavilion in San Diego is one of my favorite places in California. I've been to several concerts there on weekend afternoons. Anyway, yeah, anyone who wants to join the Treasure Island Museum, it's very easy to do. Our website is treasureislandmuseum.org. And I'm also easy to reach. You can reach me at ann@treasureislandmuseum.org. And also, Tim Oliver, I see you are here and you commented about someone on our board is trying to raise money to have Pacifica recast. Efforts have been made to do this over the last 80 years, and maybe someone will be successful this time. A new Pacifica on Treasure Island. I care more about the statues, though.
That's wonderful. And I've been educated a lot in this 1 hour we have, and we will be inviting each of you back for more. So you can expect it. But thank you all again. As I mentioned, if you'd like to bid on Laura's book, it's available on our auction site at californiapreservation.org/bid, and you can join CPF. But we appreciate your time, and I encourage everybody to visit us on Thursday. We have a program at 12 noon that will look at tiki culture in Palm Springs, and that's a nice follow through on what Anne was talking about, the Covarrubias murals and the Pacific culture and the influence of Pacific culture in California. So we'll be following up with part 2. This is part of a 4-part series that will end next Thursday, the 11th. So we hope you'll join us for all 4 of them. Thank you all again, and we'll see you on Thursday.
And thank you so much for inviting us, John.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
Good. And hope to see you at the other programs.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.